Hello, my name is Stephen Diorio. I'm the Executive Director of the Revenue Enablement Institute. With 2021 budget and planning season upon us, business leaders have some very tough decisions to make about where to cut, where to invest, and how to reconfigure their go-to-market models in light of a number of forces. First, a pandemic-induced economic downturn that looks to last over 15 months, and the demand and access issues that come with it, as well as massive shifts to work-at-home practices, digital and virtual selling. I've asked David Reibstein, the professor of marketing at the Wharton School of Business, to share the results of a significant research initiative that he led with the goal of helping CMOs learn from the past so they can make the best possible decisions about where, how, and most importantly, when to invest in the current recession to maximize firm revenues, profits, and share. David, can you tell us a little bit about the research you did looking at history, academic research, as well as the fresh survey of 350 CMOs that you did, and a little bit about your research?
So Stephen, glad to be joining you here. It is an important topic. And as you say, I'd like to talk about what is it we can learn from previous recessions that we might be able to apply in this particular recession, and then see when it is and when and where we should be spending. And I think that's what it is that I'd like for us to try and address. So let me begin with actually saying, is this a unique experience that we're going through? And what I can tell you is that for many people, as a manager, this is your first time to go through an economic downturn. But what I can tell you is that there's been a large number of them that we ought to be able to learn from. In fact, according to the National Bureau of Economic Research, there have been 17 recessions in the last 100 years. And so one of the things that I've tried looking at together with my colleagues, including you, Stephen, is I've tried looking at what have we been able to observe from previous recessions about what people did and what is it that worked. And so that's what I'd like to sort of highlight, at least here at the beginning, because for me, this is a real opportunity to learn. And I think we should try and not have to stick our finger on the stove a second time, but learn from other people that have stuck their fingers on the stove. So what is it that we can learn? Over those 17 recessions that had happened previously, they last about a year. And so, it's not like this is something that's going to go on forever, but it's also not something that's going to disappear overnight. A second thing that we can learn is that we see that the behavior that almost inevitably happens is that marketers tend to cut their investments in marketing and innovation pretty much across the board. And they do so even though it hurts their profits short-term as well as long-term. Now, I understand why that happens, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but it's interesting to see that some of that behavior ends up happening. What we also see from previous recessions is there's tremendous turmoil that happens. That is, 20% of the top quartile of firms end up dropping to the bottom quartile. So that's quite a churn. And 24% of those that are at the back of the pack move to a leadership position. And so this is a big transition that's going on. And 17% of firms, so put on your seatbelt, because 17% of firms in previous recessions don't survive. And that's what it is that we've seen from these past recessions, and we're able to see that. And that's based on a study of 2,500 companies in the 2001 recession, those particular numbers. The question is this recession different? And so we conducted this survey of 352 CMOs. And what it is that we have seen is that the anticipation is this is going to last about 14 months. That's what on average they believe. 70% of the CMOs that we surveyed. So interestingly, not everybody, but 70% of them believe that their revenues are going to fall. And how much are they going to fall? They're going to fall between 10% and the whole thing. That is from 10% to 100% reduction in revenue as a result of this recession.
So David, you mentioned you surveyed 350 CMOs. What lessons can marketers apply today? How should they think about the current recession? In what ways is it the same, and what ways is it different?
So as I've tried to reflect on this slide, what it is that we see is there's some things that are very consistent that we should anticipate with previous ones. That is, this notion of a shakeup and a realignment. I think that's something that's happened in the past, and we have every reason to believe that's going to happen in this particular recession. Also consistent with what's in the past is that marketing budgets are being cut, and yet not by all. But again, we could see just by asking people what is it that they're doing with their marketing and spending, what it is that we see is that indeed marketing and innovation budgets are being cut. There are, however, some things that I think are different from previous recessions. And to me, the biggest one, I mean, in general, when there's a recession, there's just an overall dampening of demand. Well, there's a dampening of demand, but there's also in this recession, the ability to reach your customers, the access to the customers it has really been thwarted by people, not going out of their houses and working from home. That's a big thing. The digital channels are indeed mitigating some of the impact for some, those that have made that transition. As a result, what it is I think we're going to see in this recession is a bigger difference between those that win and those that lose. So I think there's going to be even more dramatic changes than what it is that we've seen in the past. And that acceleration is going to happen, or that differentiation is going to happen and into the future, because I think there is an acceleration of the whole business model, really, of how we go to market, this digital transformation of accessing customers.
David, one of the things I found most compelling about the analysis was that the pressure to gain access to market and adapt to work at home buying and selling is really shaping the response of CMOs. Specifically, the mass majority of CMOs told us that they feel pressure to develop versatile selling channels as a priority. And this appears to be reshaping the entire sales and marketing mix and accelerating digital transformation of the go-to-market model. Can you talk about the structural changes that you see happening?
So what's reflected on this slide, it came from a survey question that we had, which basically says, what are you cutting? What are you increasing? How much are you cutting it, et cetera? And what it is that we see is, people are cutting, and this is at the bottom of the slide. You see they're definitely cutting spending on events and sponsorship. Now, part of that is because there's been fewer events for them to sponsor, but also events like sales meetings or conventions that are happening. Obviously, a reduction in face-to-face interface with customers. There's been a reduction in some of the traditional television advertising that's happening, and there's been a reduction in promotion spending. On the other hand, and this is part of what it is that you were just referring to, Stephen, is we see this great transformation to use of digital media, technologies to improve the coverage of clients, but use of technologies for doing that, and use of direct to the consumer sales channel that is going on. And so obviously people not shopping as much in stores, buying more online, and that's part of what it is that we end up seeing.
David, that's great. I wanted to get to your recommendations. David, I've known you a long time, and one thing you are not is ambiguous. In reading this study, you made two very clear recommendations to business leaders. To me, they might seem counterintuitive, but the empirical evidence is pretty clear on these points. Can you explain your advice?
Absolutely. There's two major takeaways that we have, and then I'll add a little third one along the way, which is you see it here. There's never been a better time to invest in marketing and innovation than during an economic downturn. This is the time for you to be investing. Now, I recognize not everybody can. So the comment is, if you can, spend. And that means you really have to resist the CFO as much as possible that are feeling a cash crunch. This is going to help them in their profitability as well as just gaining market share. And there's a couple reasons that I'll talk about in a little bit. And the answer is, if you don't do this, prepare for a shakeup. And you may be one of the ones that's being removed from the market, or certainly going through a major downturn. Against those few that are. Now, the good news is only 10%, based on the data, only 10% are increasing their investing. And it's that 10% that are really going to end up rising to the top. And I mentioned I was going to throw in a third thing, which is this change that we're witnessing in how people buy and everything, and the need to go in more digital. I think we're going to see that happening for the long term also. That much of the change of how we access customers, how we do our sales calls, the people buying online is something that we're going to see not just till the end of this recession, but it's going to be something that's going to carry on forever. Actually, for me, by the way, I'm having to teach virtually. I suspect some virtual teaching, not all, but some virtual teaching will continue into perpetuity.
Well, so let's get practical and maybe think more about the CEO and the board. Growth leaders are going to go in and make these arguments. You've presented to boards in the last couple months and shared this. What are the most compelling arguments to investing in growth now during the recession that CMOs can use?
It's very, very simple and consistent with what it is that I was just saying, that those firms that do invest in and increase their advertising and innovation spending during the recession, the data shows they grow market share and they grow profits. And the interesting thing is they grow both of those during the short term as well as the long term. One could see maybe in the long term that helps, but in the short term it helps as well. But I think the key thing is that the return per dollar spent may never be greater. This is the time for you to get your maximum return per dollar spent. Part of the reason is that so much of the impact of marketing spending happens on a relative basis, and with everybody else cutting, your dollars have more impact than they ever have before. So those that do make the decision to invest during this recession, they're going to find a major impact that happens. And frankly, those that don't, they're going to find a major impact also. And we're going to see that in current as well as future profits, your ability to be competitive, and the ability to keep your job.
Well, David, the report is full of examples of product launches, marketing initiatives, and evidence that folks who did have the wherewithal to invest have succeeded, and there was really not a lot of evidence to the contrary. It's a big report. Growth leaders who want to learn more about this research can get access to an executive summary and the full report at the Revenue Enablement Institute. And please reach out to us, me directly, Steve Diorio, to learn more about this research, get access to the authors, including myself and David. David, thank you so much for sharing your insights, and I appreciate your help.
Thank you. Stay healthy and good luck to everybody.